other issues like the functional requirements we're talking about now, so that we can learn more and perhaps avoid some of these pitfalls that, that come forth. So on the next slide here, we're talking about another way that some of the requirements can limit the emotion of color. All the functional requirements listed here can actually dictate the substrate and the structure, and that's just the way it is. So what does that mean to you? Well, what that means is you need color that can be mobile, that can travel across the structure and the substrate with all of the emotional integrity that you need to have. Or said differently, all those great shapes and materials actually wind up dictating the print process and the inks that can be used. So on the next slide here, why don't we talk a little bit about how we would deal with these requirements as an ink supplier using the French rabbit example. So often the technical fitness for use considerations wind up limiting the choices of pigments and the vehicle used in our inks. And for the color to pop in a way that would make the CEO of French Rabbit happy, we really need to look at some of the specific applications of this package. So in this case, we know that we need some heat resistance. You can see it's a 6-layer structure, and it's heat laminated together. So we'd need that heat resistance. And since wine is chilled, we'd need cold resistance so that the color would hold up in a display case. We need to have some flexibility so that the color could move with the structure as the product is used. We'd need some opacity in the backing to provide sort of canvas for the brand and the colors that are associated with it. And finally, in this case, we really need some exacting pigmentation so that we get good color matching throughout the brand, and so that we could take advantage of all the pearlescent effects that are existing in the media. So why don't we look at another example just to give you a different perspective on the next slide here. This is really, these are some color bars from a simple duotone label for a mouthwash brand. And the prior run is shown at the top where we have a light cyan color and a black. And this print run was perfect. It totally met the brand owner expectations, and it was a very successful production. In the second case, however, the second set of blue colors, the blue color went red and it went dirty. And the brand owner was not happy, needless to say. The issue here is that if the labels don't match on shelf, then folks assume the product inside is also inconsistent, and that leads to some of this mistrust and some of the switching costs associated with that. So what went wrong in this case, and how can we avoid that in the future? Well, in this case, the blame moved from party to party, starting with the engraver, starting with the converter, and then on to the engraver, and then the ink supplier, where everyone passed the buck in terms of who was responsible for this issue. And in the end, it actually just wound up being a brand owner decision in the procurement area based on cost. And we all know that brand owners are under a lot of pressure these days to reduce costs. In this case, a UV printing method was selected because it was less expensive than a normal solvent-based printing method. However, UV ink, we actually rely on high-intensity lamps to cure the ink, and that lamp flashing will actually ruin the light cyan color showed on the top here. So in UV, you always have to go with a darker, dirtier blue pigment, and in order to get results on shelf. So, what is the lesson here? And we can look at the next slide to summarize this. Basically, we need to get the right color and the right emotion by bringing the right people from the supply chain together at the table from the beginning. You really need to ask the hard questions, like, how are the brand colors selected, and what does the brand color really mean? What's the emotion behind it, and where can the trade-offs be made? Furthermore, how does the design process, the production art team, the pre-press professionals, and the converter change things on the way to press? And are there still color approvals required at press, or is ink adjusted in the ink fountain as the job is run? And then the million-dollar question is, does the color meet your expectations at the end of the day? In all too many cases, and as our poll showed earlier, the color does not hold up to the emotional expectation of the brand. So consider instead this alternative approach, which is to flip the model over on its head. This relies on more and better communication between the different experts of the creative team and of the execution team, and includes a couple of things. For instance, knowing the brand and then getting smart on the details that are important. Things like the equity, what's the emotional meaning, and how do we technically pull this off. And then secondarily, really a lot closer work between the parties in the workflow. So in that regard, we've really got one of the best tools that we're about to show you that can help along the way, and that is the intelligent use of brand color standards on the next slide. So many of you are familiar with brand color standards, and they can be made of lots of materials. They could be paint on metals, they could be powder coating on a synthetic board, they might be made of ceramic tile. But you need to ask yourself, what are your packages made of? Are they made from ceramic tile? Are they made from paint? I mean, you need to get real, literally. We need to have real packaging materials used in your brand color standards. Real ink, real print processes and structures, and tools that allow you to see that these colors are achievable on press. They include things like real substrate, films, foil, board, as well as laminations, coatings, and backing materials. We've migrated a lot of brand owners over to some of these real color standards who have started with older approaches like using Pantone swatches. And now they've got really an improved communication of their brand energy, faster execution of the packaging work through the process, and really a return on all that investment that we make up front in the emotion of color. So I guess the takeaway here is if you don't have an intelligent color standards program in play, you're really undermining the emotion of color. So in wrapping things up, there's no doubt that brand color is critical on shelf. And different parties have varying vantage points into this issue and into the process. And in order to differentiate your brand, you really have to deliver on the emotion in order to drive the consumer choice at shelf. Knowledge of your brand color destiny is something that you cannot delegate to someone else. And you really must consider the few things we've talked about. How do the reproduction approaches affect how the color will be conveyed in its final form? In this light, customized spot colors can really deliver the true emotional intent that you start with. The functional requirements that can really kill your brand if you don't keep track of them. And finally, the implementation framework. We want you to use an intelligent way of managing brand colors that will deliver on the emotion that you expect. And with these few things in mind, maybe your brand will be the next Tiffany, the next French Rabbit, or the next UPS.